As we get more and more sophisticated in our use of lists, we're going to start to bring in some things from CodeHS that we learned as well. So in particular, in this first demo that I'm going to show for you, we're going to talk about the use of a function to print a list. So when you have a program that has a lot of user interaction, you have a lot of user interface elements going on, you often want to print several lists. There's several different occasions where you might want to print a list, and those lists may or may not have different items in them. So rather than just copying and pasting the same code over and over, which is number one, pretty inefficient, and number two, prone to errors, and number three, not very maintainable, meaning that if you decide you want to change something at some point in the future, you've got to search out all those places where that same code appears. So for all those reasons, it's a better solution to write a single function that will print any list and then just call that function. That saves, number one, saves copying a lot of code, and number two, maintainability. If you in the future want to change something about how that list is printed out or what items in the lists are printed out, then it's very easy to do that. You only have to change code in one place as opposed to a whole bunch of places. Okay, so our goal is to print out, if you look on the console here on the right, our goal is to print out lists that look like this. So numbered lists, we're going to call them numbered lists. So we have several items that are in a list, and we want to print them out in a nice fashion, nice formatted fashion, with a number right next to it, so that if we ask the user to make a selection from the list, they can just type the number. They don't have to type the whole word. So rather than asking them, oh, type in fish, or type in steak, or type in chicken, or type in salad, those words, which is prone to error and is kind of a hassle for the user to do that, we can just say instead enter 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, so it's kind of convenient to be able to do that. So let's take a look at one way to do that, one option for how to do that. Okay, so I have a function. We're going to do it by way of a function because we have a couple, in this example, we have a couple of different lists. We have a list of entrees and we have a list of, looks like, sides. We don't want to have the same code in both places. We want to just have one set of code and then just call it whenever we need to use it. Okay, so here's our function. So remember, the way we write a function is we use the keyword def. That means define. So we're going to define a function called print menu, and then we have a set of parentheses. When you call a function, you can give it some extra data that the function can use to do its job. And in this case, we're going to give it one so-called parameter. Parameters are those extra pieces of data that you can feed into the function that help it do its job. We're going to give it one parameter called items, and this is going to be a list containing the items which we want to turn into our nice output here on the right. Okay, so here's our function definition. We have a colon to start it off. Then everything that's indented after that, the code block that's indented after that, is going to be the code that makes up our function. So every time we call that function, print menu, all of that code, it's as if all of that code that's indented as part of the function in the function block is substituted for that call. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to have a for loop in order to print out our list kind of nicely on a single line, each item on a single line like this. So there's several ways that you could do a for loop. I think I demonstrated those before. I'm going to use the way that uses this range function. So kind of similar to how we did for loops before. So I have for I is my counter, in range. Well, we don't know how long the list is, so we can get that information, though. We can use our len function, len, for length of the list. So range len items, so the length of the items list. How many things are there in the items list? And so this will repeat it as many times as there are items in the list. We're going to so-called traverse the list, start from the beginning and go one by one to the end. So each time we go through, we're going to pick out that piece of data from the list, from the items list, and we're going to print it out on a line by itself with a number in front of it. Okay, so I define this variable called item number. Okay, and that's going to be equal to the counter variable plus 1. Okay, what's the use of this guy right here? Well, this item number is how we get these numbers when we print it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so those are the numbers that are next to the items in the list in those square brackets. Okay, well, why do we have to add 1 to the counter? Okay, well, because remember, indexing in lists, indexing is the index is the number that represents or points to the position in the list of the data you want to get out. Indexing starts at 0 for lists. So the first item in a list is actually at position or index 0. Okay, so in order to make it a little bit more human-like, and for humans, we like to start counting at 1. We don't like to start counting at 0. So I define this extra variable called item number, and that's 1 more than the counter. And that will make it so that when I print out the number next to the item in the list, it's more kind of human-like and starts at 1 instead of 0. Okay, and then here's my print statement. So let's take a look at this print statement. There's kind of a lot going on there. So I got a lot of bits and pieces. Now, if you look at the bits and pieces, you can kind of start to see where they fit. So this first part right here, okay, this square bracket, beginning square bracket, that's the square bracket that starts off, that's in front of the number in the list. Okay, then I have this, str item number. Okay, so str means convert it to a string. Okay, in Python, remember, there's different so-called data types. There's numbers, which integers, whole numbers, and floating point numbers, decimals. And then there's also strings. Now, strings is kind of a catch-all category. Strings is just any kind of random text, so letters, symbols. They also include numbers as well. And so when we print stuff out, we have to make sure everything that we print out is a string. Okay, so if it's a number, like item number is a number, that's going to be a whole number, an integer. So in order to be able to print it out, we have to convert it to one of the string types. So str is a function that makes it into a string. Okay, so this item number, that's how we get the number in the brackets in our list. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's where that number comes from. Okay, then we have the closing square bracket, and then we have items, bracket I, bracket. Okay, so remember the bracket is how we pull out or indicate what piece of data in the list we want to pull out. Okay, and the index we're going to use is I, our counter. So our counter is going to start at 0 and go up and up through the list. So each time it goes up, it's going to pull out the next piece of data in the list, and it's going to print it as part of our menu. Okay, so line 20, this is kind of where the action goes on as far as what you see on the screen. Okay, now just to kind of prove a point, let's say I didn't use this item number variable, and let's say instead of printing item number here as part of my print statement, I just put the index itself, I. Okay, let's see what effect that would have. So if I run it, now look at what happens now. See, the lists are still there. No, there's no errors. But notice the numbering on the list now starts at 0. So the first list is 0, 1, 2, 3 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. Second list is 0, 1, 2 instead of 1, 2, 3. And that's okay. I mean, if you don't mind that, that's okay. But most humans kind of like we like to start counting at 1. That's kind of intuitive for us instead of 0. So that's why I put that item number plus equals I plus 1 there, just so that the numbering kind of shifts up and it's a little bit more intuitive for humans. Okay, so fix that up, and now the lists are kind of back to how we want. Okay, so there's our function. Now it's actually fairly short. It's like 3 lines. 2 lines like 17 and 18, those are just comments, just to kind of let you know what's going on. But really the heart of the function is really just 3 lines. You got your for loop, and then you got those 2 lines in between. So that function is really actually pretty compact. Now the nice thing about it is now when we go on into our main program down here, normally in a program, by the way, you put the functions at the top. If you're going to write any functions, normally those go at the top, and then you have your main program at the bottom. So in our main program, now I'm going to show you how we can use that kind of multiple places, so it makes things a lot easier. So we're going to print out 2 different lists. So the first menu list is this list that I call my list. It has 4 things in it. It's got fish, steak, chicken, salad. Then all we need to do to print out the list now that we have our function is call our function, print menu, and give it my list as the parameter. And it just takes my list and it does its thing. And then we want to print another list. We don't have to copy and paste code again. And if we have to fix it later on, we got to fix it in 2 places. We can just call our function. So my list 2, you got your fries, onion rings, nachos, and then you're going to print the list. So all you got to do is just call print menu again. This time though with my list 2 as the parameter. and it'll do the same thing. It'll print it out. See even how it adjusts. Those two lists have different numbers of items in them, and the function automatically adjusts because you have this guy right here, length of items, and so that automatically adjusts for how many things are in the items that you pass in. Okay, so here's a demo of using a function to print a list. We'll call this pretty printing a list, where you have numbered items, and so the user, if they want to make a selection, they can just type in a number. Okay, so there's our first demo of the day.